Hey guys, Friday Cop Guy here. Tonight's going to be something a little bit different. As I told you before, this channel is a lot of different things. Some of it is to include law enforcement topics. I've been a police officer in Pennsylvania for about 4 years, and as a job as a police officer, it is our job to stay on top of topics such as anything that involves law. So any updates to law, any changes to law, anything that you know, police officers need to be mindful of, we have to be on top of it every single day. Something that's recently passed that is near and dear to me as far as something that's going to not necessarily change the way I do things, because the way I do things is, I see things should be the way they are no matter what, and you should do the right thing no matter what. But one of the big things is the new George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020. Pretty much there's a fact sheet here that I'm going to go over. I'll put a link in the description. Pretty much this goes into, from what is explained, it's a national standard for the operation of police departments. It's mandate data collection on police encounters, reprogram existing funds to invest in transformative community-based policing programs, and streamline federal law to prosecute excessive force and establish independent prosecutors for police investigations. I'm not going to go too far into everything, but I'm going to hit on to a couple things that definitely hit home with me. Work to end racial and religious profiling. That should be a job for every police officer as soon as, every police officer, no matter what. It should have taken a reform act for that to be a problem. And, it's sad to see it that they actually have to put it in a federal mandate for something like this to happen. This prohibits federal, state, and local law enforcement from racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling. Mandates training on racial, religious, and discriminatory profiling for all law enforcement. I already received, we received training on that on our updates. We also received training on that for various things. And I've been receiving that as long as I've been a cop. And it requires law enforcement to collect data on all investigatory activities, which is, from what I assume, a police report, so I don't understand what the difference is that. Saving lives by banning chokeholds and no-knock warrants. Banning chokeholds and carotid holds at the federal level in conditions of law enforcement funding for state and local governments banning chokeholds. Chokeholds is one thing. I don't know. I don't really, unless it's a deadly force situation, which I think it's too later. We'll get that when we get there. It bans no-knock warrants in drug cases. No-knock warrants for drug cases, from my experience, there's no. It would have, so you lose some drugs. It's not the end of the world, especially if it's just marijuana. Or I don't think that to be that big of an issue. No-knock warrants. I don't see that, and that being going to the wayside being an issue at all. And this goes into, again, with the banning of chokeholds. Requires that deadly force be used only as a last resort, and requires officers to employ de-escalation techniques first. Well, obviously, I would think that no one would just walk up to someone and just grab them and say, "Hey, come here," and just choke someone out. I don't understand how that could be an option instantly. I mean, I would think all officers employ some kind of de-escalation techniques to begin with, unless, of course, someone runs to you and you have to use that force immediately. But it gives you an option. This changes the standard to evaluate whether law enforcement use of force was justified, from whether the force was reasonable to whether the force was necessary. Condition grants on state and local law enforcement agencies establishing the same use of force standard. We pretty much all use the same force standard anyway, so I'm not quite sure exactly what that's getting at either. Limit military equipment on American streets and require body cameras. I wear body cameras. I think they're the best thing in the world. I think they are better. I mean, they're actually something that, criminals don't like, because they get caught in the act. You can't beat what's on video. So body cams are great, and it is good because, it shows that, more transparency. You can't hide from the video, nor can you hide from the audio either. And as long as there's good policies and good leadership in place, you shouldn't have any issues with viewing body cam footage. I love my body cam. Limits the transfer of military-grade equipment to state and local law enforcement. I'm not quite sure what they're getting at. If they're talking about, tear gas, or they're talking about vehicles, I don't understand. I don't have any military-grade equipment where I am. But like bigger departments like cities and stuff like that for like ride control, I understand certain techniques, but I don't know what they're getting as far as limit the transfer. I don't know what they're trying to limit. Requires federal uniformed police officers to wear body cams, and requires state and local law enforcement to use existing federal funds to ensure use of police body cams. That's a good idea. Requires marked federal police vehicles to have dashboard cameras. I mean, that's great. Nothing wrong with that. Hold police accountable in court. Makes it easier to prosecute offending officers by amending the federal criminal statute to prosecute police misconduct. Mens rea requirement, 18 U.S.C. Section 242, will be amended from willfulness to recklessness standard. I guess they're just trying to say they're changing it from, the cop actually wanted to hurt somebody to what someone considered reckless behavior by a reasonable person standard. A lot of the things are done as far as what a reasonable person would do. So I guess what recklessness would, to what a reasonable person will do. But it has to go by a reasonable police officer, because a reasonable officer and a reasonable person are two different things. What a reasonable person believes isn't exactly the same as what a reasonable officer believes. Because an officer's training is much different than a civilian's training. And that's why it's great to go through like civilian law enforcement academies if you can. Talk to your local law enforcement, engage with them, learn from them, because a lot of people think it's really weird to go up to a police officer and have a discussion, and people think it's weird for police to just say, "Hey, how are you?" And they get very defensive for whatever reason because they believe that the police are out to get them, which 99% of the time is just not the case. It enables individuals to recover damages in civil court when law enforcement officers violate their constitutional rights by eliminating qualified immunity for law enforcement. While we're on this topic, qualified immunity. So qualified immunity, if you don't know, in the United States, it's a legal principle that grants government officials performing discretionary functions immunity to civil suits unless they show that the official violated clearly established statutory or constitutional rights of which a reasonable person would have known. So a reasonable person knows the Bill of Rights. Like you have the right, right, freedom of speech, all that. That obviously with law enforcement, there's there's gray. There's never normally black and white. There's always gray. And you got to dance that line. Kind of like calling fire in a theater, causing duress, that's not protected by freedom of speech. Certain things that officers say, there's things that officers can't say online. That's not protected. They can lose a job from that. They can lose everything from that. I understand what they're trying to get at with getting rid of qualified immunity. I don't think they should completely get rid of it. It's going to create a lot of frivolous lawsuits, for my opinion. I don't know what your opinion is. Comment or subscribe and tell me what you think about what your opinion of qualified immunity is. Obviously, if a police officer violates someone's rights and it's documented and it's proven and it can be placed into fact, yeah, there's no reason they should have qualified immunity. So I don't understand why it's an issue to begin with, but if you can explain it better to me, then let me know what you think. So getting back into the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020, goes back and this enables individuals to recover damages in civil court when law enforcement officers violate their constitutional rights. Yeah, that makes sense. They'd be sued in civil court. Yeah, and the issue I found with that too is like, for me, like if you sued me as a person, I can lose everything, from my house to whatever. And in essence, yeah, that makes sense, because if that makes someone less likely to, want to obviously violate anyone's civil rights. They don't want to lose their house that they worked hard for, their personal belongings. But the issue with that comes is police do certain things and they get sued, and sometimes they settle out to appease the masses or appease a particular unpopular opinion or what have you. And if that happens it can be tens of thousands of dollars, and police might not necessarily be terribly in the right or the wrong, but now that person just lost everything and they were just trying to do their job and they may have made a small mistake. Now that small mistake equaled their entire career being thrown away. So I understand what people are trying to get at as far as qualified immunity, but there's some issues with that can be, brought up. Investigate police misconduct, improves the use of pattern and practice investigations at the federal level by granting the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division subpoena power and creates a grant program for state attorney generals to develop authority to conduct independent investigations into problematic police departments. I don't see anything wrong with that. If they want to investigate, there's a department that has a lot of personal complaints or having complaints against them. I don't see why the AG can't step in. Empower our communities to reimagine public safety in an equitable and just way. This bill reinvests in our communities by supporting critical community-based programs to change the culture of law enforcement and empower our communities to reimagine public safety in an equitable and just way. I don't know what that means. I mean, I don't know what people want their police to be, but this should have been a topic of discussion way before this even came. 2020, let's be honest. I mean, modern policing has changed in the last 10 years, let alone the last 50. This should have been an issue of discussion long before that. It establishes public safety innovation grants for community-based organizations to create local commissions and task forces to help communities to reimagine and develop concrete, just, and equitable public safety approaches. So community policing, which they already have, which I'm not quite sure exactly what they want to do with that. They should already use the police in the program in their community to do that. That's community policing. That hasn't changed in how many years. These local commissions would operate similar to President Obama's task force on 21st century policing. 21st century policing. There you go. Community policing. Change the culture of law enforcement with training to build integrity and trust. Integrity and trust is all we got. You know what I mean? If people don't trust us, they're going to turn to either vigilantism or other methods to do what they got to do to take care of their own. So, obviously building integrity and trust, it can take many years to build your integrity and trust, and it can take one bad day to ruin it all. Requires the creation of law enforcement accreditation standard recommendations based on President Obama's task force. Accreditation is good, but accreditation costs a lot of money. So, where are you going to get that money from? My department's trying to get accredited right now, and it's difficult. It's a lot of money. Creates law enforcement development and training programs to develop best practices. Well, that happens all the time, so. Studies the impact of laws or rules that allows a law enforcement officer to delay answers to questions posed by investigators of law enforcement misconduct. I mean, that's true with any kind of, that's the same with defendants for criminal law and also the defendants that's also a union thing. But I understand what they mean, but there's a lot of red tape that goes with that as far as with union and stuff, with police unions. It's the same thing as having a lawyer, but I'm not quite sure exactly where they're getting with that. Enhances funding for pattern and practice discrimination investigations and programs managed by the DOJ, Community Relations Service. Okay. Requires the AG to collect data on investigatory actions and detentions by federal law enforcement agencies. The racial distribution of drug charges, the use of deadly force by and against law enforcement officers, as well as traffic and pedestrian stops and detentions. I mean, we already do that anyway. I mean, all of our data, all of our information, we have Clary, we have the NCIS, we have the UCR codes, all those are reportable stuff to the AG, so I'm not quite sure exactly what else they want from that. Unless they want a racial breakdown of who we stop and who we talk to. I mean, that can be skewed no matter what. I mean, just because of 1 week I write 4 tickets to someone that's white, and the next week I write 2 tickets to someone who's of color or who's not of color, I don't understand, I mean, I guess that's something I want to see. I'm not quite sure exactly what they're trying to get out of that. Establish a DOJ task force to coordinate the investigations, prosecution, and enforcement efforts of federal, state, and local government in cases related to law enforcement conduct. Okay. I mean, it's just they're trying to make a very federalized internal investigations. A lot of smaller departments don't have an IA because, let's be honest, I mean, they don't have the funds for it. The larger departments have internal affairs. Smaller departments like mine, they don't have internal affairs. So, I mean, if they want to find the funds to I mean, we don't have that kind of issues in our department, but I'm sure there's some that obviously they do. And if they want to use funds to do that, I don't see any reason, no problem with that. Improve transparency by collecting data on police misconduct and use of force. Creates a nationwide police misconduct registry. I don't think that's a terrible idea. To prevent problematic officers who are fired or leave one agency from moving to another jurisdiction without any accountability. I think that's fine. There's no reason why that's a bad thing, so that's fine. Mandate state and local law enforcement agencies to report use of force data desegregated by race, sex. See, I don't really. We do that anyway, so I don't understand what race, sex, disability, religion, and age. I don't see any reason why that would be an issue, unless they want to use that for particular agencies and say, well, this agency arrests 95% of people that are of color. Well, 95% of the population is of color, so that's why it's like that. It could be that. It could be the reason, or it could be racially motivated. It could be. I highly doubt it is, but there are some that, it is like that. So I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, I mean, that could make sense. It's not going to really work for smaller agencies because they don't have the money for it. But to each their own. And this, I don't understand this, why this is a thing. Stop sexual assault in law enforcement custody. There shouldn't be sexual assault in law enforcement custody at all. Make it a crime for a federal law enforcement officer to engage in sexual act with an individual who is under arrest, in detention, or custody. It prohibits consent as a defense to prosecution for unlawful conduct. Incentivizes states to set the same standards. Well, obviously, you can't have sex with someone who's in custody. I don't understand what the problem is there. I mean, that's never an acceptable thing. I don't understand. I guess that wasn't a law before, but I guess they put it in there. I mean, I thought that was kind of like an assumed thing, that you don't have sex with people that are in custody, but apparently, who knows. Well, that's going to be my small snippet of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act 2020. I think there's a lot of good in there. That should have been handled a long time ago. But I think there's a lot of, again, like what we deal with as police officers, gray area. So, it's a comprehensive. It says it's a comprehensive approach to hold police accountable, end racial profiling, change the culture of law enforcement, empower our communities, and build trust between law enforcement and our communities. Systemic racism and help save lives. Yeah, I mean, is it going to do that? I mean, it might a little bit. But then again, like I said, all this is up to leadership. You're as a police officer, you're a leader in the community, no matter what you do. You have a gun, you have a badge, you have the authority to take someone's freedom and their life. So be it. We're all leaders, and we're looked up, or should be looked up to as leaders. So, but the leaders of the leaders paved the way for their subordinates to become better people and better cops. None of this should ever came to a head. None of this should have came to where it is now. This should have been a given fact long before even like the LA riots, like the beatings of Rodney King. There's like that stuff. Like, it's unbelievable how people thought. And it's one of those things, if you see something, say something. If I'm in a position and one of my officers or one of the people that I work with, come out and say things that are completely, racist to a point where I believe it's going to be a problem, or just in general, you nip in the butt. You take care of it. You police your own. That's what the community expects from us, and that's what we should give them. We should not give them anything less than perfection. People deserve the service that we give them, and there's some cops that lose their way, and they don't realize that we serve them. They don't serve us. And it's never them versus us. It's us as one. Because separately, same thing. You divide a nation, the nation crumbles. You divide the community between the police and the community, we're not going to be able to work together. This is way deeper than a race issue. A lot of it's up to leadership. So, at the end of the day, I think it's definitely a leadership issue. Hopefully this all gets figured out. And hopefully there's going to be some pushback from the Supreme Court. I know for a fact it's going to get pushed to the Supreme Court, and there may be changes. I know for a fact there's going to be legal changes or challenges at least. So we'll see what happens when it goes there. If you guys have any questions or if you guys have any comments about this, please like and subscribe and let me know what you think. This is obviously going to be a very hot topic because of everything that happened in the past year. And I look forward to talking to you and looking forward to see what you have to say. Thanks for your time.